What is the science behind a growth mindset? It's an interesting question, isn't it? Posed by one of my clients the other week, and I thought my answer could be of interest or of value to you. So, the growth mindset, I'm sure it's something you've heard of. Hopefully, indeed, you have. The term was coined by Dr. Carol Dweck, who many years ago, working initially, I think, with school children, noticed that there were kind of two groups that formed. On the one hand, there were kids that thought that their learning, their competencies, their intelligence was more or less fixed. She gave those people the term a fixed mindset. By contrast, she noticed that some kids were much more resourceful. They understood that deliberate practice, trying hard, investing in learning had a real return, and things tended to improve over time. Right? So they are the two different types of mindsets. On the one hand, fixed, on the other hand, growth. So who's right? Well, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? I can't think of many skills or competencies that don't improve significantly with deliberate practice. And that might be easy to identify in terms of skills, but even the more sort of nuanced cognitive attributes we all have. Attention, well, you can train that, can't you? Problem solving, reasoning, critical thinking, all of these things, anything really that can be measured can be improved through deliberate practice. So the growth mindset clearly is winning. And more from a kind of perhaps psychological perspective, learning is a good thing to do, isn't it? Certainly as we all navigate the change like we have in the last year or so, something that's pretty obvious is your ability to learn, to adapt, is a pretty important skill that will put you in good stead, not just for this year, but I think over the coming decades. So, look, I'm all for working to your strengths. I think there's a lot to be said for identifying your strengths and working to them, but don't rely on them. Right, your strengths may have got you to where you are today, but where you want to go might require some development of other skills and competencies. So, what does the science say about this? Well, the neuroscience is actually pretty clear on this too. Your brain is built around a growth mindset. Its very architecture is built around the principle of plasticity. I'm sure you've heard of the term neuroplasticity, the idea that your brain physically changes based on your experience. So learning has a very real impact on your brain, and it responds much like a muscle. This is quite reassuring, isn't it? The fact that your brain really does adapt based on how you use it, and learning, experience, challenge has a measurable, observable change on your brain. And really, you could go as far as to say that learning, challenge, novelty, the unfamiliar is actually part of keeping your brain young. So there's a question that prompts really, right? How can you make your brain more adaptable? How can you increase its potential plasticity? Well, that's actually quite easy. If you think about neuroplasticity or learning from the brain's perspective, break it into a three-part process. In the middle, you've got your learning, the experience, the doing stuff. But there is something at the beginning and there's something at the end that really enable this plasticity to happen. So exercise, physical exercise. You might think it's unrelated to learning. Quite the opposite. When you exercise, when you work out vigorously in particular, your brain produces a protein called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And that, my friend, is the protein that enables your brain to learn. It's the thing that we associate with not just neuroplasticity, but neurogenesis, the actual formation of new brain cells. So if you want to make your brain more adaptable, physical exercise is a necessary part of the formula. It's the thing that basically fertilizes your brain for subsequent adaptation. So that's step one. Step two is the learning, right? The engagement, the experience of unfamiliarity. Okay, and then step three. Step three, when does the actual plasticity happen? Well, that's when you sleep. Much like your physical muscles don't grow as you lift weights. It's when you stop lifting the weights and they get their recovery that they actually change. And the same is true with your brain. So simple stuff to improve the adaptability and the plasticity of your brain. Prioritize your physical exercise, prioritize your sleep. So then finally, learning itself. Take it seriously. As I've said, your learning and development is a key competitive advantage, really. So treat it seriously. One question I'd probably encourage you to consider, given that it's now at least close to the beginning of the year, look back over last year. What are the things you learned? Spend a moment identifying them. What are the skills you developed last year? What did you get better at? I'm sure there are loads of things if you spend the time reflecting, and just that exercise alone helps you understand how much you are changing all the time, right? And when you are reflecting on your previous year, maybe don't just think about skills and competencies. What else have you learned? Maybe about yourself. Last year was pretty challenging for many of us, I'm sure, but there will have been lots of nuggets of positive growth. So that's one reflective piece. And then your homework after watching this video, now identify 3 things you're going to get better at this year. What are the skills you are actively going to develop this year? And then create a schedule around them that will enable it. If you're struggling to think about what would be important to learn this year, do a little experiment. Imagine it's 3 or 5 years ahead. Thinking about your role, thinking about you as an individual. What are the skills you wish you'd started 3 to 5 years ago? Can suddenly give you some insights. This kind of perspective retrospection. Is that a valid term? It is now. All right. I hope that's been useful. Growth mindset, engage in learning. And also part of this has to include what? Failure, doesn't it? Real experiential learning or experiential wisdom comes through testing things, experimenting, and in there lies an inevitability of making mistakes and failing. So do that, welcome it. And not only will you improve your learning, develop your skills, become more competent, but as I said, you'll keep your brain young as well.